Let's take a look at a game played by Michael Adams. Michael Adams is a British grandmaster who was once the fourth highest rated player in the world. His peak FIDE rating was 2761. Here's a picture of him from the Wikipedia page. And even today, if you look at his rating, I think it's 2701. He's 1 year older than I am, born in 1971. Okay, this game is a positional masterpiece. We can learn a lot from it. Particularly, I can learn how to be patient and how to break down a stubborn, closed position. So let's see how he does it. Adams has the white pieces. So e4, e5, knight f3, d6. So it's a Philidor defense. I've been studying Philidor defense lately. We saw this played in my last, one of my recent videos in a game by Greco from 1620. And in that game, Greco played bishop to c4. But the modern move here Adams plays is d4, gaining space. You hear this phrase a lot. You want to gain space in the opening phase. I always wondered, what do people actually mean by space? And I don't think we can give it a mathematical definition, but it has something to do with how many squares are behind your pawns that are advancing. So advancing that pawn to d4 creates more central space. Okay, now black plays an unusual move. It's not optimal, I would guess. Queen to e7, breaking some, opening principles here, developing the queen too early, blocking in the dark squared bishop. But it is going to be very instructive to see how white can break through a stubborn black center. So black is going to protect his pawn on e5 very strongly here. So he's not going to give up the center. He's not going to take this pawn on d4. In fact, when you get this pawn center here, neither player likes to be the first to exchange pawns here and here. White wants to keep the tension. He doesn't want to allow black to recapture with a pawn and retain a strong pawn on e5. White wants to retain his space advantage and maybe take on e5 only when it's advantageous. And black doesn't want to give up his center by taking on d4. So these pawns are going to remain in tension for some time. Okay, Adams plays knight c3, c6. Okay, so black is making a lot of pawn moves and one queen move here. But c6 does keep the knight off of these key squares. It also opens a square for the black queen. We will see it make use of that square later. So it isn't without logic. Bishop to c4, sensible development. And now another pawn push, h6. So I wouldn't recommend playing like this as black, but it is solid. Black is controlling white's pieces from getting into his position with pawns. Knight to g5 is no longer possible, hitting at the f7 square. I think h6 actually was a reasonable move here. For example, if black had tried some developing move like knight to f6, then knight to g5 could be annoying, although probably even better is to resolve the center first and then play knight to g5. And then black has nothing better than playing bishop to e6 in this position, and white can ruin the pawn structure. Although even then I'm not sure that's terrible for black, since these two central isolated doubled pawns control all of these squares, and it does take some positional skill to break through into the position. Anyway, black puts a stop to any knight coming to g5 here. So Adams castles, and then black plays knight to f6. So Adams' development in this opening looks like textbook development that you teach beginners. Put your knights on their natural squares, the bishop on c4, get the dual pawn center, and castle kingside. Looks just like out of a textbook. Okay. But black's position is solid, and it's hard to do anything here. You can't simply just keep developing your pieces like bishop e3, queen d2, centralizing your rooks. You're going to have to do something to break black's position, possibly a piece sacrifice to break open the pawns, or better yet, a pawn break. Good pawn break to think about in the position that may occur later is the move f4. With better development, you want to open lines in your position. Another possible pawn break that seems a little harder to achieve is c4, c5, attacking the d6 pawn. But something must be done in this position rather than normal development. Adams plays a4. This is another space-gaining move. We're getting more squares behind our pawns here. Okay. And black responds with queen to c7, transferring the queen perhaps to a better square, although taking, too tempy to do it. On c7 at least, the e7 square is open for the bishop, and the queen on c7 still supports the e5 pawn. So neither player is still taking. We still have this tension in the center. Adams gains more space on the queen side with a5. This not only gains some space, but it also dissuades black from castling queenside later on in the game, because this pawn is so far advanced into his position, it already serves as a point of attack. So Adams took the time to push his a-pawn forward. Okay, black plays bishop to e7, getting ready to castle. But then comes knight to h4, very important move. Remember the plan I mentioned earlier, white needs a pawn break. f4 is a good pawn break. So he got the knight off of the f-file. But there's more to this move. It kind of stops black from castling. If black castled in this position, white would have knight to g6 because the pawn is pinned by the bishop on c4. The rook would move maybe to e8, and the white knight could take the bishop. It wasn't a very active bishop, but at least white gets the bishop pair and the potential to open up the position. And so the two bishops should dominate an open position. So after knight to h4, castling isn't as desirable as it could be. You do have to watch out, though. When you put your knight on h4, you have to realize there's a bishop in line with that knight, so you have to calculate the tactics accurately. Perhaps black can take a pawn here and attack the knight. Well, it doesn't turn out so well after knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, pawn takes pawn, because the knight is coming to d6 on the next move with check. And so white would have a commanding position. Okay, that pawn is attacked 3 times. Okay, so the knight on h4 is actually fine. Tactics have been calculated by Adams. And so black continues to develop and plays knight to a6. Kind of a strange move, but maybe heading for b4. We'll see. Now Adams did play knight to h4 in order to play f4 here, but he doesn't play f4 yet. He prepares it. The reason he doesn't want to play f4 in this position is because after maybe e takes d4, queen takes d4, black has the move d5 in this position, threatening the bishop, but also unleashing the dark squared bishop, which is threatening to come to c5, pinning the queen. And the only way out of this is to bail out with bishop takes knight, which was guarding the c5 square for the bishop to come. And white really doesn't want to trade his active bishop on c4 for that knight on the edge of the board. So Adams is very patient. He sees all of these things and realizes black can't stop me from playing f4 when I want to play f4. So I'm going to play it when I prepare it. So first he takes on e5. The pawn recaptures. And then he plays f4 because there is no pawn takes d4 to lure the queen forward anymore. Okay, then the knight comes to b4. And here I probably would have taken on e5 to open up the f file. But Adams doesn't do that. He plays f5. That looks like a good move now that I think about it. It blocks out this bishop. This bishop has nowhere to go but d7. And it makes castling even less desirable than it was because this pawn can serve as a point of attack. There's a rook lift possible in the position. There's a possible sacrifice with bishop takes h6 if black castles. So that looks like a powerful move to me. And already I greatly prefer white's position. Okay, black plays queen to d6. Okay, threatening to trade queens here, but also threatening queen to c5, forking the bishop and the king. So white deals with both of those threats. He doesn't want to trade queens, so that's why I call that a threat. He plays queen to e2, protecting the bishop and not trading queens. You don't want to trade queens when you have more space and you're the one that's attacking. Your king is safe. His king really doesn't want to castle on either side of the board. He doesn't want to castle queenside because of that a pawn. He doesn't want to castle kingside because of the f pawn. So you don't want to trade queens when you have more space and the safer king. So then black plays knight to g4, which unleashes an attack on this knight. Okay, and also then there's tactics involved here. The knight is on prise, but the point is if white takes it, then remember this tactic, we have queen to c5, check, forking the bishop and the king. And so white doesn't want to get the knight for the bishop. White doesn't want to lose that powerful bishop pointed at the king side. So he doesn't take the knight. He just moves the bishop back to safety. He's in no hurry. Bishop to b3. Okay, queen to c5, check comes. King to h1. Then bishop takes knight, queen takes knight, restoring the material equality. Bishop falls back to save itself. And now queen to h5 threatens f7. There's also this bishop here. Okay, so how is black going to protect f7? Well, castling again is still not palatable because of the rook lift, because of bishop takes h6. In fact, let's take a look at castling. I believe bishop takes h6 right away is good. If black takes the bishop, Then there's this move, queen to g6 check. The pawn is pinned by the bishop on b3. So there's two moves. Black can get mated quickly by blocking with the bishop, and white could push to f7, and then he's mating on g7, or push to f6 rather, and he's mating on g7. Or the king can go in the corner, but then the white queen can mop up, check, 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 and the rook can lift, and black is not going to survive that. So castling isn't possible, but f8 needs to be guarded. Maybe the queen can drop back to guard it, but black realizes he can't really castle on either side, certainly not on the king side. So he gives up kingside castling completely and moves rook to f8. He's going to just live with his king in the center of the board. Okay, now knight a4 attacks the queen. Okay, and the queen is being lured off of this strong diagonal. It can't come forward here because of a pawn fork. So it's being lured off that diagonal, and white is giving up that a pawn to do it in order to develop their bishop. White is developing his bishop to e3 here. Okay, and the bishop is heading for the c5 square, protected by the knight. So the bishop will attack the rook, which is guarding f7. And if the rook moves, then black is dead with queen takes f7 check. All right, and let me make a non-move here for black. If he allows this, moving the rook is no good, but neither is bishop to e7. Because bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, and the pawn comes to f6 with check. And then if black takes the pawn, we have queen takes h6, and we have two pieces pointed at f6. And again, black is not going to survive that. So there's a big threat, bishop to c5 in this position, and black deals with the threat by retreating the knight back to that terrible square on a6. In order to protect the c5 square. Now, this allows a tactic. Black saw it coming. Black is giving up his queen here, but getting a knight and a rook in return. Let's see how Adams accomplishes that. He plays knight to b6, unleashing an attack on the queen and attacking the rook in the corner simultaneously. So black's best line here is to take the knight with the pawn, and then rook takes queen, and then pawn takes rook. So black got the rook and the knight for the queen. But white's attack doesn't abate. He plays bishop to b6, controlling this important d8 square here. Okay, also stopping the knight from getting back into the game on c7 or on c5. Bishop to e7, controlling c5, maybe intending to get the knight back that way. And now this is indicative of Michael Adams' patience. He simply plays h3 in this position. He wants to lift his rook and do something with it, and he doesn't want to get back rank mated. There's no back rank mate in sight. But when you're in complete control of the position, you might as well play this move when you have time to do it, rather than wait for it to be forced. In fact, there's nothing black can really do in this position. Watch his next two moves. He plays bishop to d7, rook to d1, centralizing, bishop to c8, rook to d3, lifting the rook. Now the reason for lifting the rook, even though it's on this file it wants to be on, is because the queen is going to come behind it on d1, and the queen, the rook, and the bishop are all going to threaten this d8 square. The threat would be rook to d8 check, bishop takes d8, queen takes d8 mate. That's what white wants to do. Meanwhile, black has been moving his bishop back and forth. Okay, black plays a4, attacking the bishop on b3. And again, Adams is extremely patient. Instead of playing his plan, queen to d1 here, he plays bishop to c4. He says, okay, I'm just getting out of the way of that attack. Other players might have just said, I don't need that bishop. I'm going to play queen to d1. But there's a slight problem with that. It does allow bishop takes f5, where the rook is going to defend now this square along with the bishop. And that move is made possible by a4 because both bishops are hanging. So that's why Adams patiently moves the bishop to c4. Then knight to c5 tries to drive the rook off of this file. And it succeeds, but it moves to the g file, attacking g7. So Adams is going to attack from a different direction. Knight takes e4, attacking the rook. Rook takes g7, attacking f7 with all three of these pieces. And black plays knight to d6 to guard it. Okay, also attacking the bishop on c4. Bishop d6, excellent move. The pawn is pinned. It's immune. Black probably doesn't want to trade bishops and then allow the pawn to take on f7. So he plays bishop to f6, attacking the rook. Now Adams doesn't move the rook. He plays bishop to c5. And his reason is, well, if you take my rook, not only am I going to get your knight for it, but I'm going to attack your rook on f8. And if you move it, you lose because f7 is hanging. So black tries something other than taking the rook, takes the bishop. But then f takes e6. And there's still an attack here on the f7 square, as well as the knight being under attack. So now black is forced to take this rook. Bishop takes d6. And then this is the surprising move that makes the game last at least a few more moves. It's move 32, and black castles. If I were black, I probably would have forgotten that castling was even allowed. Okay, but yeah, he never moved his king, he never moved his rook. Castling is legal. All right, so that was the only way to defend against the f7 threat and the bishop takes rook threat simultaneously. But Adams follows through and takes the rook. Okay, and then bishop takes f8. So now we're playing with a rook and bishop versus queen. But queen takes f7 renders this pawn a passed pawn. This pawn and this queen are too strong. Okay, black checks on the back rank, and what do you know? Adams already moved his h-pawn. That's good. King to h2. Bishop to d6. Loses on the spot with queen to d7 check. King to b8. And then the pawn advances. And black resigned. Okay, the point here is if black takes the pawn, black loses the rook. Okay, if black moves this pawn to check the king, maybe trying to live a little longer and attack, maybe g3, rook checks. Well, white has queen takes bishop. Because if you recover the material, you queen, and you're winning. Okay, so excellent positional game by Michael Adams. Very instructive to see him dismantle that very strange-looking Philidor defense. Even if you never faced that move, queen to e7, you can learn a lot from how he handled that opening. So thanks for watching the video.